Okay, so now the speakers are here. Pankaj, let's begin.
Okay. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar by the Human Rights Law Network in collaboration with Legal Aid Committee, Government Law College. As you all know, the topic for today's webinar is climate justice laws, what we have and what we need. Firstly, I'd like to give you a little introduction on HRLN, our collaborator. Social Legal Information Center, as a registered society and trust, has established a division called the Human Rights Law Network, HRLN, to partner with coalitions and social movements in India for providing free legal aid and legal literacy programs throughout India. This coalition comprises of NGOs, social movements, academics, students, activists, researchers, judges, and lawyers in 24 states in India dedicated to the use of legal systems to advance human rights, struggle against violations, and ensure justice and access to all. They see the mission to create a justice delivery system that is accessible, efficient, accountable, affordable, and pro-poor. They provide pro bono legal services to marginalized people, make justice accessible to them. They also undertake public interest litigation to advance the state of human rights in the country, among many other noble pursuits. Now, a bit of introduction on our two speakers for today, Advocate Minaz Kakalia and Advocate Zaman Ali. Advocate Minaz Kakalia joined Human Rights Law Network, Mumbai, in May 2015. Practicing primarily in the Bombay High Court, she fights for causes ranging from accessibility for persons with disabilities, sexual and gender-based violence, reproductive rights, and environmental justice. Advocate Zaman Ali litigates at the High Court, lower courts, and various tribunals such as NGT, NCLT, DRT, and administrative tribunals in Mumbai. While Advocate Zaman Ali works on a broad spectrum of cases, he is particularly passionate about environmental law and governance, which constitute the bulk of his work. He has worked in matters concerning the protection of forests, western ghats, wildlife corridors, floodplains, riverine and coastal pollution, and national parks, amongst others. We would like to thank them for conducting this webinar. And now that we're done with the introduction, may we proceed with the webinar?
Should I start or
Yes,
Zaman, will you start?
Minaz, you can go ahead.
Okay. So hello everyone, thank you for joining us. So this webinar, we have decided between us to divide into two parts. I will be dealing with climate change and coastal environments, and Zaman will be dealing with forests and other environments and what climate change and policies entails for those environments. My session will be for around 20 minutes. In the first part, I will try to describe briefly the policies that exist already for the protection of coastal environments and our track record on the implementation of those policies. And in the second part, I will try to talk about, in my opinion, what we still require, the kind of policy interventions that are required. And then maybe we can have a more interactive session in the last 10 minutes of this half an hour session. So as a lot of you may know, climate change is an imminent threat that we face today. It's unfortunate though that India does not have many policies that deal with the threat of climate change. As far as coastal environments are concerned, there is just one legislation, a lot of you may have heard of it, it's called the Coastal Regulation Zone Notification. The first CRZ notification, it's known as the CRZ notification, was issued in the year 1991. What the CRZ notification basically does is that it divides the coastal environment into 4 zones, what is called CRZ 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it accords different levels of protections to each of those CRZ areas. One was issued with the intention of protecting the coastal environments, because it was felt at the time that there wasn't a legislation that dealt with that particular topic. And it was with that intention that the 1991 CRZ notification was issued. The CRZ notification of 91 was subsequent by the CRZ notification of 2011. What we have seen from a comparison of the 1991 notification with the 2011 notification is that there have been substantial dilutions in the notification. Although the government stated purpose of revising the notification was in light of the tsunami that happened, and therefore they felt that more protections were needed in the coastal environments. Unfortunately, what ended up happening because of vested interests and because several coastal state governments felt that they were losing out on the tourism industry, what ended up happening is that the 1991 notification was diluted to some extent by the 2011 notification. Is that several amendments were brought into the 2011 notification. These amendments were not brought in after any scientific studies or ground truthing, but were brought in simply to permit certain projects in certain parts of the countries. So for instance, in Mumbai, an amendment was made to the CRZ notification specifically to permit the construction of the Shivaji statue. A similar amendment was introduced to allow for the construction of an airport in Navi Mumbai. So similarly, various other amendments were introduced to the CRZ notification that diluted it to a great extent. But at the same time, the concept of what is called a CRZ 1A area was more or less maintained. Now, what is a CRZ 1A area? It is an area that is accorded the most amount of protection on account of the fact that it is ecologically very sensitive. So for instance, mangrove areas fall within CRZ 1A, sand dunes, beaches, coral reefs, all of these areas fall within CRZ 1A. CRZ 1D is essentially the area between the low tide line and the high tide line. So the 2011 notification, although it did contain many dilutions of the original notification, to a large extent, it maintained this protection that was accorded to the CRZ1 areas. In CRZ2 areas also, CRZ2 areas are basically areas that are substantially developed within 500 meters from the coast. So for instance, in Mumbai, most areas fall within CRZ2. So the 2011 notification said that in these areas, they will freeze the development that has already happened. And the intent of the notification was not to allow more development and thereby stress the coastal environments. So this was a concept that was contained in the 2011 notification. Therefore, what it did towards that end was to freeze what is called the FSI. A lot of you may have learned about the concept of FSI, which is basically floor space index. So it froze the developable area within the CRZ areas so that the coastal environments in those areas were protected and there weren't that many anthropogenic stressors on those environments. That was the 2011 notification. Then the government felt the need once again to revise the notification once more because of vested interests, and more particularly because the state governments felt that they were losing out on development opportunities in the coast. Therefore, a committee was constituted to look into the CRZ notification again and see what amendments could be introduced or whether there was a need to come out with an entirely new notification. That has resulted in what is now the CRZ notification 2019. This is by far the notification with the largest number of dilutions to what the original intent of the CRZ notification was. Like I was just mentioning a couple of minutes ago, in CRZ2 areas, the previous notifications visible in those areas because they were already stressed out environments. What the 2019 notification has done significantly is that it has said that the development in those areas will be as per what is permissible in the development plans that are made for the city. So for instance, in Mumbai, we now have the development plan of 2034, which, as a lot of you may have heard, is problematic in many, many ways. what the development plans do not do is they do not account for environmental concerns. And this is also something I'm going to half of my session, which is that development plans and other departments of the government need to integrate environmental plans into their functioning. But what I was just trying to say was that the development plan of 2034 does not take into account environmental concerns. So if, for instance, in the development plan, an FSI of 4 is allowed in a particular area in Mumbai, that FSI will be allowed regardless of whether it's a coastal area, whether it's close to the coast, whether it's vulnerable to floods. And that is a major part of the problem with the 2019 notification. I was also mentioning a couple of minutes ago CRZ1 areas, which are areas that were accorded at least the most amount of protection in the previous notifications. What the 2019 notification has done is it has again further diluted that. It has allowed for a host of tourism industries to be permitted within these ecologically sensitive areas. It has allowed development of resorts and other such facilities in coastal areas. And so the 2019 notification is extremely problematic, but that is a webinar for another time. So this is essentially the only legislation that our country currently has to control development in coastal areas. I just wanted to touch upon briefly the real threat of climate change on the coasts in India. And I think that is something that to a lot of us seems really remote, and so even to the government, I'm sure, so it's not something that is adequately addressed. But recently a study was conducted by an organization called the Climate Control Project, where they projected the vulnerabilities of coastal areas. And they also particularly studied the vulnerabilities of coastal cities in Mumbai. And if I could share my screen for a moment, just to give us an idea of what the real threat of climate change is to our coastal environments. Oh, it seems like screen sharing is disabled. But anyway, what the map basically shows is that by 2050, an area that is currently inhabited by about 36 million people in India alone will be under the sea. And I'm talking about 2050, which is not very far from now. By 2100, they predict that an area that is currently inhabited by around 200 million people will be underwater. So this just gives us an idea of the kind of the urgency of the issue, and the lack of legislation, if you compare it to the gravity of the issue, is really, really stark. I'd like to come now to the second part of my session, which is, in my opinion, what are the things that we need to address as far as our coastal environments are concerned and the policies that we have are concerned. What policy interventions are required as far as coastal environments are concerned in the country? I think the first thing, as I mentioned briefly before, is the integration of climate change consideration in the development plans that we have in coastal towns and cities. At least under the Maharashtra Regional Town Planning Act, there is no requirement for environmental considerations in the development plan, in formulating the development plan of the city. Therefore, the first and most important intervention that is required is the folding in of climate change considerations into development plans. Secondly, and this has been our experience in a lot of the litigations that we've done in coastal areas, is the importance of the participation of local communities in shaping the plans of those areas. Under the CRZ notification, there is what is called a coastal zone management plan, which is required to be prepared. The coastal zone management plan basically shows you in the map what is CRZ 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Hello? हाँ ठीक है thanks.
Archana, mute yourself.
Acha, screen, you can share your screen. That's what Vikrant is saying.
Okay, fine. So, can anyone see this? Is everyone able to see this, the map that I'm showing? Okay, never mind. And maybe we can get to the map later on. So what I was saying is that the CRZ notification requires the preparation of CZMP maps. These coastal zone management maps are supposed to indicate the CRZ areas. It is also supposed to indicate the fishing area, the areas that are demarcated for fishing communities, the areas that are demarcated for fish drying yards. It's also supposed to show the breeding and spawning grounds for fish, etc. Although the CRZ notification requires the participation of local communities in developing this CZMP map, what we have actually found is that there is absolutely no participation is sought from the community when these plans are being prepared. As a result of which, in Mumbai, we have a CZMP map which only shows you your CRZ2 areas. It doesn't show you fishing areas, it doesn't show you fish drying areas, it doesn't show you the navigational areas for fisher folk, which it is supposed to indicate. So what we've found in the litigation that we've done is that when you have plans related to plans, legislation, schemes, policies that are going to impact a community in a certain way, it must be formulated with the participation of that community. And if it does not, then it does nothing to help those communities. And those communities are the most vulnerable to the changes that are likely to occur from climate change. So even in Mumbai, the Koli community, which lives along the western coast of the city, is the most vulnerable to the potential impacts of climate change. But they were not consulted when these CZMP maps were being prepared. And similarly, even when development plans are being prepared, the opinions of these communities are not sought, and that is something extremely important. You cannot have development without considering the needs of these communities that are the most vulnerable to the potential impacts of climate change. The third part is the strengthening. This is the most obvious thing, the strengthening of the existing environmental laws that we have. One, like I said, is the CRZ notification, which has been diluted to a significant extent by the 2019 notification, when in fact what we needed was to strengthen it further. We also have, and Zaman will probably touch upon that briefly in the next session, what is called the Environment Impact Assessment Notification. What we have right now is the EIA notification of 2006. There is again now a proposal to change that notification. There is a draft of 2020 that has been circulated for public comments that again dilutes the notification significantly. So while what we need is the further strengthening of the existing laws that we have, inadequate as they are, what we find that is happening is the dilution of these laws for the purpose of some skewed idea of development that we seem to have. The fourth part that I'd like to focus upon is the aligning, I think, of the mandates of different departments of the government. So for instance, there are many stakeholders. You may have coastal communities that are stakeholders and different government departments that are involved in different ways in these coastal environments. What we have found is that all of these departments work in isolation to each other. There isn't any unified approach as to what can be done to protect the coastal environments. So you will have the Ministry of Environment working separately, you will have the Ministry of Shipping working separately, you will have the Department of Fisheries working separately. As a result of which now, just to give you another, very localized example, in Mumbai, you have the proposal to construct a coastal road. This has been the proposal of the Municipal Corporation of Mumbai. The Department of Fisheries was not involved at all in this process. To give you, Ministry of Shipping has planned to build several ports across the coast of India. Once again, the Ministry of Environment was not involved at all in this process. The only time they become involved is when an application is made for environmental clearance. So what I'm trying to say is that all of these ministries and departments have mandates that are different from each other, But as far as the impacts of what they do on the environment are concerned, there needs to be a unified response instead of them functioning in this fractured, incoherent manner. So yeah, I think I'd just like to end with that by saying that I think the most important thing is for us to look at the policies that we have, understand whether they are adequate or not in dealing with the threat that we currently face, and also to ensure that the mandates of different departments and ministries of the government are aligned with each other when it comes to the environment. And yeah, I think I'd like to end with that, and maybe we can have a bit of an interactive session if anyone has any questions or queries. Anyone? Okay, if not, then maybe Zaman, we can go on to the next round and then take questions together at the end of the session.
Oh, okay.
Maybe
that
people
works.
can
That
just
works for me
process
too.
in the meantime.
So,
yeah,
come back in the questions at the end.
Yeah, cool.
Sure. So thanks, Afreen Merchant. Now, I mean, to begin with, when we look at climate change and just that is required to have some sort of an evolving change in our society in the present times, we need to understand that the fight against climate change has to be political. First thing foremost, let's be clear, because climate change and climate justice is also about local governance to global governance. And when we talk about local governments, it should be enough. The concept should be enough that it reaches a village where a village is independent enough to manage its own ecology, and up to a global level where global leaders are able to manage this common property called atmosphere. So it's more about governance. It's a systemic issue. Climate change today is a very systemic issue, and with this angle, do we need to think of the future from now on? And especially the present pandemic that has come out is in a way, is a slap to the present system that has existed so far. Because if you see the relation that comes out from viruses, infectious viruses such as COVID today, that lead to COVID today, is that the more deforestation you do, the more wildlife trade that you have done, there will be more outrage of millions of such viruses that will eventually enter human habitation, and it will cause problems. But coming back to the specific topic of climate justice, we see that, like Minaz had already pointed out and explained in detail about how coastal ecosystem is going to get affected in the region, and that is definitely one of the first ecosystems in the world, in every country, that will face major challenges, and that is happening starting from 2050 itself. So apart from the coastal aspects that we see that we need to also understand this fact that adaptation measures that any country such as India takes has to keep in mind that we are a tropical country and we have a very different kind of ecosystem all over the country. We're a large country. So the climate change effects that will happen in a Himalayan region is going to be very different from the Western Ghats region of Maharashtra, and it's going to be very different from the Gujarat and Rajasthan deserted areas. So the fact here being that we need to adapt to climate change and bring in changes in our land use planning. Like Minaz pointed out about development plans, land use planning or investment framework has to be very localized, where we give a big credibility to scientific issues prevailing in that local area, and then go on to talk about other systems which will be on governance pattern. So basically acceding to science for a localized area will be the first and foremost. Now, giving you an example here would be such as the fact that, like we being a tropical country, and because of the massive change that we are noticing in our climate is going to actually extend further, from the point of view that we are going to have more severe rains in fewer days, areas which are in the western area, southern area, and central regions. So then we have to make sure at that point of time that our policies to ensure water bodies which are presently located in such regions have to be conserved. And that's where comes your legislations like wetland rules, or even if you bring Environment Protection Act here, it's about making sure you have your groundwater management policies in place, you have your wetland rules being made stricter in these times, and also on how such water management will be used for the benefit of farmers. What we are also seeing, this climate change is impacting on the entire monsoon rainfall, which is affecting the farmers on the kind of crops they are going to be growing. And this has led to, we know the situation today that's happening on the level of depression that has caused mentally in various areas of Vidarbha, from Vidarbha to Madhya Pradesh to Gujarat. So when we are thinking of a systemic change now in terms of climate justice narrative, there has to be a complete change in every legislation, either by way of bringing an amendment to respective areas, or also and also rather than not or, and also to bring a more comprehensive legislation on climate change in general, which will entirely deal with emissions. And that particular such kind of legislation framework has already been set up in say New Zealand and England so far. The idea behind having a specific legislation on climate change right now is that there is no accountability that today exists on emission norms. We need to how we are actually engaging today. You must be reading all about Paris protocols, Kyoto protocols, all the national missions and number of national missions that our country is so-called professing at this stage. What misses out today that does not bring any deterrence effect in the entire system is on accountability. For example, we are in such a position today that if you look at the website of Ministry of Environment and Forest, as on today, you open it up, you will find and realize the major systemic issue in the mindset is that entire website works on a system of granting clearances. Everything, each and every word on that website solely talks about how and when and how the clearances procedure has been made easier, and to what extent now the project proponents can apply to an extent that from 180 days of giving environment clearance, you will be getting it in another 60 days. So instead of strengthening measures, we are definitely going on a path that is going to be overwhelmingly stressful for us in the very near future. Leave aside 2050, I think in the next 10 years, as a matter of fact, we will see major changes in terms of more people, turning themselves out from rural areas, especially there's a concept on this point, which is climate refugee. So people is moving out, there'll be a mass migration again, and it may not happen simultaneously, but it will be an overall, a yearly increase in numbers of people moving out. So this will cause a huge systemic break and may cause social conflicts in urban areas and rural areas combined. So this is just a general viewpoint because of the time being very less. But if you want, we can definitely dwell on to how climate change will impact the forest areas if at all the deforestation continues, which calls for us to again amend the particular legislation like Indian Forest Act. For example, today the Indian Forest Act is of 1927, and it still carries a complete colonial hangover of why this act had come into place in the first place. I mean, the reason there was that not to protect forests. The reason altogether for this 1927 legislation was to ensure how you cut timber in a particular region and ensure that this timber is used for further industrialization and development. That's the heart and core of such an act. And we are living in 2020. It's about we'll complete a century anniversary of this act, and we are way far behind in protecting it. Though thanks to the Supreme Court's decisions time and again, like Goda Varman, we have had changes which has brought Forest Conservation Act in 1980, which essentially says that any forest, even if it is recorded or not recorded in the government records, it does not matter. Any forest, any area which falls within the definition of a dictionary meaning, which falls within the dictionary meaning of a forest, will be declared as a forest. So it will be a deemed forest. So certain interventions by Supreme Courts have definitely helped. But I think we should more look at what further can be made in the sense that how our environmental legislations can evolve further. And first and foremost, like I already pointed out about having a localized systemic concentration rather than keeping a very general. So on, I think every village, every district, every state needs to, where they ensure that all the natural bodies in their particular regions are kept as it is, and as much as possible they need to build up more such natural bodies. This is outside of the fact that whatever remaining ones are there needs strict conservation, because the exposure that climate change will bring in a tropical country like ours will involve a lot of rain. So it is possible that if we have more rains in fewer days, we can actually use this as an opportunity to continue to recharge our groundwater that will not affect the farmers. So land use planning is at the core of climate justice laws in coming next. Then secondly, I think when we look at, we need to be real to understand that the whole investment framework in this country, the whole economic system that works, was also centered around a lot of globalized and maximum of greenhouse gas emissions in the world are actually them from the early 19th century, and how the countries in increasing the greenhouse gas and carbon emissions. So keeping this in mind, I mean, I'm not at all any point of time saying that they have done this earlier and now India should also continue unless we reach the same level as developed countries. No, we have to now change, we have to take responsibility. But at the same time, when we're seeking an investment from multinational companies, I completely feel that we have to make sure that they need to mandatorily invest a certain amount in ensuring this low carbon emission technology also. It cannot be that they come and invest certain money and then you leave it to the Indian administration to handle the technology, which because the evolution of technology has been such so far that so-called green technologies today are still being sold and developed for the internal uses of the developed countries. So this should be made mandatory. If an investment is happening here, they have to ensure certain amount of money needs to go in certain technologies which will lead to low carbon emissions. This needs to be an adaptation response only for the economic sector. Other than that, the government levels, you need to have land use changes. Plus, we also need to quickly adapt to the best available science we find. And for that, we need to see a relation between something like environment and food. Now, as on today, if I can call it, the food biodiversity or food productivity that we generally have in the country was pretty decent, was pretty good. But so far we see that with change in climate change, with the increase in the differences in the climate and global warming and change of entire atmospheric structure in different areas, we may end up losing on a very important grains. And so when we think of even something like a Food Act, National Food Security Act, we need to keep in mind that you bring amendments in all these areas where science is telling you that climate change will bring certain impacts. So you need to start ensuring that there is no monoculture when you're having some sort of farming that's happening in a particular area. It should not be that only one particular type of crop is grown, and that is unfortunately been actively lately it has been so that government policies are actively promoting this. And in my mind, especially when the science says, I think we should straight away accede to what the science says here, and we have to ensure that monoculture does not take place, because then you will lose soil fertility and it will be more vulnerable to the coming change that's happening, the coming climate change that's going to happen in every particular area. So again, food productivity, land use planning, investment framework are important. Plus, when we talk about urban spaces now, of course, urban greens are to be remain untouched. We have seen that how people can evolve if you build a momentum by giving you the example of RE Forest of Bombay. And it is very good to see that people have come on ground and to test it to ensure that few last remaining green lungs of the cities is kept intact. But that is the fight that is still going on. I'm sure that fight is going to go on in many other cities. We're already seeing that happening in Bangalore and Delhi. So we have to make sure for cityscapes, apart from the present green areas, we have to push our governments to improve our public transportation system to a level where the usage of cars, the usage of other private vehicles go down. At this stage, like how Minas pointed out, if you promote something like a coastal road, which is eventually going to only cater to cars of the city that exists today, and in fact, it will help promote more production of cars, and it will help promote people taking up more private cars to enjoy the free route. I mean, if they're building roads, then you have enough roads as on today for cities. Why don't we just increase hugely, not just marginally, by by an nth number to get the public buses, which may be air conditioned, but if you see today, if you see like one particular bus can literally take place of at least 20 cars. That's the average that's coming in. So if 20 cars could just go away in one particular bus. So these are small things, even at the city level, that we need to push and suggest at policy level. Right now, I think this talk is not more towards the judicial approach and all that. So right now, yeah, I'm only sticking to the policy level intervention that one can push for by the help of NGOs and other activists, and as well as your urban planners, rural planners, architects, engineers, scientists. They all come together and dwell on this. So this will be a very important platform. And again, public consultation will be the crux of every policy change that's happening. And we are seeing a total dismantle of this system altogether in the present regime. Like how Minas pointed out, the draft environment impact assessment 2020 that has been published for public objections is something which I feel every listener, every person here, as well as must spread the word around, have a look at it. And you can go on websites like Let India Breathe that have summarily given the key pointers, which clearly show that not only today the industries are being given a complete leeway by telling them that you can apply for environment clearance as and when you can in future. Even if you have not applied for any environment clearance, no closure of any industry will happen now. You just have to pay a few small remediation costs, and you will be let scot-free, no criminal cases against you. And if in these today's times, if such legislations are being promoted, I think it's high time we need to protest at a very mass scale. And please begin, because there has been a big movement happening on Draft EIA 2020. I humbly request everyone to just read up a little, spend 10 minutes after this, just read up on Draft EIA, and you can send your objections and suggestions straight away to the ministry. Everything is well organized on the internet on the kind of key pointers that can help you in sending your suggestions. So definitely look at this legislation today. And like how I earlier pointed out, we don't have a Climate Change Act, which I'm not discounting at any point about the implementation of policies or the importance of executive policies that come out. But the major, as I earlier told you, the major impact of just issuing a bureaucratic order is that there is no accountability. So only for accountability and for stringent accountability, for stricter measures, we need to have an act of parliament on the climate change issue. So eventually, if we do keep things in mind, I think it will benefit communities and our way of living, as we see in the future. So on that note, also this also reminds me about the fact that all this while from 2014 onwards, even at the Paris Accord, when India was represented at the Conference of Parties at Paris, which is the Paris Agreement that was signed, all this while India has focused on the fact that they are going to devalue and destabilize thermal power plants. They are not going to encourage any sort of new coal industries. The coal sector will not see any further increase. But you see what's happening. In the last 4-5 days, an entire new mission of opening coal has come up. So I really don't think we are going in a positive. We're not taking any positive step under climate change at this stage. Everything has been all talk. So I want you to also please read up on exact relations between coal industries, thermal power industries, with the climate change and global warming that's happening today. There is an alternative. There is an alternative of renewable energy, solar, wind turbine, but at a sustainable level, it is highly possible that now India has the potential to convert to transform itself and not rely on such coal and thermal power plants. So I think with this, I want to close my talk so far and be open for questions.
Thank you, Zaman, for such a brilliant summarization of all that it is about the climate justice laws that we have in India. If I mean, the floor is open for question and answers. If somebody has a question, you can please speak up. In the meantime, before anybody comes up with a question, Zaman, I have a question. And like you very rightly have pointed out that we have to look into the investment framework of the economic policies of our country. Do you also think that the intellectual property laws somewhere also heavily dwell or are very strongly related to all the laws impacting climate justice? And how do you see this?
So, intellectual property rights in general is an individual work. It's the work of an individual person, and that's where the intellectual property rights emanate. It's someone's artistic work or musical work or a copyrighted work. I feel when it comes into the field of climate change as on today, any engineering model that comes out, any new technologies that will actually help in lessening climate impacts in developing countries need to be kept open sourced. This kind of inculcation or this kind of system within the people at large must come out by having encouragement from the governments of the day, by telling them that, boss, you come up with certain technologies and we will help you promote more. We will ensure that this takes the place, and this is something which is missing. So IPR can go a long way if things are kept open source for technologies. So I think it's a good question.
Absolutely. And specifically, considering that IPR, like the plant varieties, for example, and as you've connected it with the farmers, and how we need to actually focus on the land aspect and the productivity aspect in order to impact climate change. If we have laws like the plant variety and all of it, which like we had the Gujarat case by PepsiCo against the potato farmers, things like this, which apparently may appear to be individual cases on a particular issue, but they have, auxiliary impacts on the climate in some way or the other, is what I was trying to focus on. But well covered, yeah, makes sense. Like, okay, so any other question? Anybody?
Hi, Zaman.
Being that shy.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Rajshekhar. Hi, Zaman.
Raj, hi.
Yeah.
I had one question. So, considering that farmers are the biggest stakeholders when it comes to climate change, since it affects their livelihoods over decades of life cycle, right? Does there exist any sort of policy consultation with these ground level real stakeholders from the local governments at like an institutional level?
Yeah, so at this stage, we don't have a particular machinery that straight away goes and meets farmers and asks for the comments on a certain problem that they're facing so far. But we do have at a state level. See, land is a state subject. So when you look at Maharashtra, for example, you have certain policies that have come up there where their consideration is taken care of. But ultimately, how you treat, how do you keep their consideration in terms of priorities actually matter. For example, I'll give you a basic example of Forest Rights Act. Now, this act is of 2006. This allows for some sort of community ownership over the rights that of the tribal of the forest dwellers over the tribal forest lands, and that can include areas where they also farm. That will also include areas where they have water management. They have their own ponds, which they have been managing all this while. But the idea of not giving them their due rights, and then ultimately then you allowing other projects to come up on the same land by perusing their applications in about just 20 or 30 days, actually shows that even if you bring changes at policy level, are you able to implement it with full object and scope that it asks for? So that is something where we have seen being missing out in Maharashtra. So you do have, like for example, dams. Construction of mid-scale dams always required a panchayat. You have PESA Act as well, which requires a permission from the Gram Panchayats for small-scale projects to to take over. But then this such acts, you just bring like a small circular and you amend that particular act, and by saying that now for XYZ reasons public consultation will not be required, is something we have been noticing in Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, everywhere. So even if you bring policy implementation here, and you speak with people on the ground, take note of their problems, to what extent are you really going ahead and solving the issue? I think you are not keeping the priorities of local villagers at a pedestal. We are even today, especially today, I would say, we are keeping our poor and marginal peoples, their voices, everything kept completely aside. We're ignoring them as if they are complete third-class citizens. Such is the situation. So there's a massive change we need, and that can only come from the public and students like you all. So we need you guys to be with us, to be on the ground with us. And what we approach in courts and file petitions later is a latter thing. Former is always to take your voices up, take their voices in you, and then bring it up against the government and speak out.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Zaman. I have a question for both of you. I want to know how the judiciary is reacting on issues like Coastal Road Project and Shivaji statue. Like, I just want to know what is the judiciary's view and how they are looking at this climate change issue. Minaz, maybe can.
Yeah. So I think the judiciary, to a large extent, mirrors the views of the government.
Hello.
And a lot of people at large. Hello.
Hello.
Should I continue?
Hello.
Zaman, we
Zaman,
can
can you hear us?
Huh.
We can hear you.
Sorry, should I continue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was saying that the views of the judiciary to a large extent reflect how the government and also people think about the environment. People believe that if a particular project is going to, in the larger picture, going to lead to the development, of the area to the region, then people believe it is okay if there are some environmental impacts in the process of achieving that development. So even the judiciary to a large extent feels that, if it's a massive infrastructure project, it's going to benefit so many people, then environmental concerns shouldn't receive that much weightage. And that also is a result of this flawed perception about this argument that you're either for the environment or you're for development. And that argument itself is a very flawed argument, because what it fails to take into account is that we have legislations to balance those two interests. And when we go to court, we don't say, oh, look, there's no law on this subject, but we want to protect this environment anyway, so you cancel this project. That's not what we do. We point out that there is a law that requires you to take certain steps. We point out that those steps have not been taken by the government or by the agencies involved, and therefore to scrap whatever clearances that may have been granted. But the judiciary does not look at it that way. They see, it's a big infrastructure project. Like I said, it's going to benefit so many people. You're just being obstructionist for the sake of it. So it's like environmentalists against people that are pro-development. That is how the argument is framed, and that framing itself is flawed. Yeah.
Thank you,
Also
Minaz.
looking at it, saying that crores have been spent on the particular project, and therefore, scrapping it would be loss.
Yeah, and also just to take off from what Zaman said at the beginning of his session, which is that all of this is really a political issue. And one of the first things we need to think about is, what is our understanding of the term development? When we say development, do we mean that you can build a road which is in the fishing grounds of a community that has existed in the city before any of us were even here? You decimate their livelihood, but 1% of the population of the city will have a nice joyride on that road. Is that what we mean by development? By development, do we mean that you can drown 750 hectares of a forest to build a dam to provide water to a few people in Bombay? Is that what you mean by development? So I think we fundamentally need to think about what our understanding of this word development is, and need to evolve a more inclusive definition of development.
Okay, I have another question for both of you. So you have explained how judiciary is taking decisions and all. So I mean, like what we can do for further to pressurize judiciary maybe, or the government to so they can act on their whatever the legislation they have created.
You want to take that?
So, so resorting to judiciary again will have to be a last resort for anybody. If you want certain effective implementation of anything, the first thing is please protest. Write to your government authorities. Tell them. I also understand the fact that every PL that we file is also because of the reason that they have not acted upon our complaints. But the point here is that, in a way, your question is definitely from the point of view of that judicial inclusiveness in understanding the science behind climate change is still lacking. We do not have sensitive judges even before the NGT anymore. I'll be very direct to say that. Where whatever is written in actual science is let go of by saying that, look, we have some sort of a management plan, which turns out to be completely unimplementable, to be honest. So the equation of understanding science and environment matters and climate change matters is something which has to, and that is lacking even today. I'm not saying at any point of time that all judges have more understanding whatsoever, but I would say majority of them still have this outlook that, if a project is being built, it is being built for the public good. End of the story. Let's not please give us any scientific document on, because we are only dealing with a small 1 acre or 2 hectare or 3 hectare of land or one small water body. What use does it have? But if you tell them importance of how a water body actually recharges the entire water body, which makes sure that you continue to get your water from your water pump. These are things which involve scientific analysis. So point being that our judges remain insensitive, and yes, it's a task, but we have to, by filing more petitions and by arguing in courts in a manner which in a shorter time we are able to convey the real science behind the issue, is something which is a heavy work but doable, and we must do it.
And also, just to add to what Zaman was saying, I think also, if you want to put it in like simply economic capitalist terms, right? If you want to think of, we need development, we need the economy to flourish, etc. Even if you want to frame the environmental issue from that perspective, ultimately you cannot destroy the environment to such an extent that it will itself lead to, it's going to have an impact on the economy also eventually. Because for the economy to flourish, you need the productive capacities of these environments to remain. So if you destroy the forests, if you destroy the rivers, if you destroy the coasts, it is inevitably going to impact the economy itself. So even in this very cynical capitalist terms also, if you want to think about it, that you can explain the need to protect these environments even from that perspective. So perhaps our judges might find that a more appealing argument rather than protecting the environment.
Correct. No, I agree. And this has been tried also as one of our strategies.
Right, even in the IAM, remember the Chief Justice
by putting up an ecological value.
Right.
Putting an ecological value on a ecosystem.
Yeah.
And that monetary value on every ecological system is actually today in place in the general public, for the general public to look at. So, be it coast, be it forest, you can still place an economic value to every ecosystem. And then you talk about money and the project and how much of investment will it actually benefit people from.
Hello.
Yeah, I have a comment also. Hello.
Yeah, Deepak.
Yes, what Archana has pointed out is really very important at this point of time. What about the judiciary, how it thinks when it comes to the development work and how it relates with the environment. Because as rightly Minaz and Jaman has said, we have also seen the similar pattern here in Patna, wherein we involved in a case with regard to the felling down of trees. And when the argument was going on in the courtroom, and suddenly when the advocate general has said that this project is for the government buildings where the government officials quarter and judicial officers quarters will be made, then suddenly the whole discourse has been changed and it comes like, oh, it is not a commercial project. So see, in the name of development of such kind of development, where we can say that for the judiciary also it is like, oh, it should go on, like it should move on, and whatever it comes into the way, there ultimately we need to find alternative, but the project should go on. So we need to also think development at what cost, because when we start engaging with the government officials in case of demolition of jhugis, they were also saying ki, this is under the smart project plan of the city and this need to be clean up. And when the residents approached through non-governmental organizations or CBOs to these officials, they were saying that हमने तो आपको नहीं बुलाया यहाँ बसने के लिए, तो आप यहाँ से जाओ. So the whole idea is the government never thinks on that line whether they have to be rehabilitated or not. The important point is the judiciary need to be think on those lines, because ultimately the government has to do with their projects. Crores of rupees are on a stake, so they are going on with whatever the clearance or approval they have. But we need to press more and more to judiciary to ascertain the rights. This is just a comment from my side. Thank you.
हाँ, मैं भी ये बोलना चाहती हूँ.
सुजाता जी, हाँ.
हाँ, हेलो, गुड आफ्टरनून एवरीवन. मैं ये बोलना चाहती हूँ कि हम कल मैंने देख रही थी एक राय निकला है शायद सुप्रीम कोर्ट से कि जमीन जिसकी कोल माइन ये उसकी. हाँ, तो हम अगर एनवायरनमेंट को देखेंगे, एनवायरनमेंट ट्राइबल राइट्स ये बहुत क्लोजली रिलेटेड, और जिसका हाथ जमीन है उसके हाथ पावर नहीं है. मीन्स आदिवासी जमीन में रह रहे हैं लेकिन वो सारे जमीन गवर्नमेंट के हाथ में है, लेकिन वो एनवायरनमेंट प्रोटेक्ट कर रहे हैं. और जैसे मैंने अभी जो तोलाविरा का जो स्टडी हो रहा था वहाँ पे गवर्नमेंट का जब मैं ये देखा है, उनमें सारे वो दिख रहा है कि सारे जंगल ही है, लेकिन वो लिखा गया है एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड है और उसमें कुछ वो बैरन है, इसलिए उसको दे दिया गया. अगर जो रोड डिपार्टमेंट या जो अदर डिपार्टमेंट जिसका काम है डेवलपमेंट, वो चाहते हैं कि कैसे करके उनका डेवलपमेंट काम कर लेंगे, लेकिन ये सब तो जज के पास नहीं पहुंचता है ना. जज के पास जो लॉ है वही पहुंचता है, लेकिन ग्राउंड रियलिटी में क्या है वो पहुंचता नहीं है. इसलिए जो राय भी निकलता है वो एक अजब सी राय भी हो जाता है. तो मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि इसमें हम कैसे आगे जाए.
Naz, you want to take that?
No, you go ahead. Zaman?
Sorry. नहीं, बिल्कुल सही बोल रहे हैं आप सुजाता जी, क्योंकि यही फाइट रही है आज की डेट में. एक बड़ा लेजिस्लेशन फॉरेस्ट राइट्स एक्ट जैसा एक एक्ट है जो ट्राइबल्स को इतना पावर दिया है, जबकि ट्राइबल्स लोग, ट्राइबल फैमिलीज जनरली उन्होंने अपनी तरफ से जो भी प्रोसेस होता है, एप्लीकेशन फाइल करना होता है, वो सब भी फाइल किया है. और आप देखें कि एक्ट में ये भी लिखा है कि अगर किसी ने फाइल किया है एप्लीकेशन, तो अगर उसका नतीजा पेंडिंग है, अभी तक उस पर नतीजा नहीं लिया गया है, तब तक भी वहाँ पे कोई काम ऐसे नहीं हो सकता है. तो जहाँ हो सके फिलहाल वो चीज़ को आपको थोड़ा सा उस पर फोकस करके जिन एरियाज में, क्योंकि ऐसा भी हुआ है काफी जगह, हमने भी नोटिस किया है कि कभी एप्लीकेशन दी नहीं फॉरेस्ट राइट्स के अंडर अपने प्रोटेक्शन के लिए। माना कि ये ऐसा लॉ है जो हर एक जुबान के लिए नहीं दिया गया है, बस इंग्लिश में अभी निकाला गया है और हिंदी में निकाला गया है, जबकि हमारी इतनी सारी लैंग्वेजेस हैं पूरे कंट्री में, जबकि हर एक लैंग्वेज में उन्होंने नहीं किया गया है। उसके बावजूद भी अगर जहाँ हम जैसे लॉयर्स उनको मदद कर सकते हैं ये बोल के कि क्योंकि उसका कोई टाइम पीरियड एक्सपायर नहीं हुआ है, एप्लीकेशन जो है सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी बोला था कि अगले 3 या 4 महीने में जितने नए एप्लीकेशन आ रहे हैं उन एप्लीकेशन के हिसाब से नतीजा दिया जाए फॉरेस्ट राइट्स का। तो वो एप्लीकेशन जरूर फर्स्ट स्टेप आपको जरूर मेक श्योर कि सब लोग डालें, क्योंकि तब तक फिर कोई प्रोजेक्ट नहीं आ सकता। और अगर प्रोजेक्ट आया है तो माना कि जुडिशरी अभी सेंसिटिव नहीं है, बट कहीं ना कहीं आपके पास एक स्ट्रॉन्ग केस होता है कोर्ट में अप्रोच करने का। तो ये सारे जो स्ट्रैटेजीज हैं थोड़े ध्यान में रखने पड़ेंगे। अदर देन दैट हम इस देश में इस वक्त की जहाँ सेंसिटिविटी अभी भी बहुत कम है पब्लिक इश्यूज में, डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट दैट हमारी हिस्ट्री इतनी स्ट्रॉन्ग रही है ऑन कम्युनिटी पार्टिसिपेशन, पूरा कंट्री ऐसी चली है टाइम एंड अगेन, उसके बावजूद भी आज की डेट में इतना जुडिशियल इंक्लूसिवनेस सेंसिटिविटी बहुत कम रही है। तो आज की दौर में जो कुछ किया जा सकता है एज लॉयर्स, एज सोसाइटी मेंबर्स एंड ट्राइबल्स लोगों को जितना हम एनकरेज कर सकते हैं अपने स्टेप्स के लिए, पहला कदम लेने के लिए, वी शुड कीप डूइंग दैट।
वो तो सही है। देखो एक रुंगटा माइन का जो इलाका है, एक फैक्ट्री बन गया है, लोग को पट्टे थे, हाँ, लेकिन उनका जो रिकॉर्ड ऑफ राइट्स वो नहीं निकाल पा रहे, लेकिन वो हरास है, लेकिन वो कंपनी उनका काम चलता जा रहा है और उसका एनवायरमेंट में जो इम्पैक्ट पड़ता है इसको कोई सोचते नहीं। वो सोचते हैं कि डेवलपमेंट हो जाए, लेकिन इसका इम्पैक्ट क्या है, एनवायरमेंट इम्पैक्ट को कोई देखने की तो बात अलग है कि सोचते ही नहीं है।
नहीं, इम्पैक्ट लेने वाले भी तो ट्राइबल्स ही होते हैं हमेशा। मार्जिनलाइज लोगों के घरों में ही गंदा पानी आता है अल्टीमेटली। जो लोग प्रॉफिट बना रहे हैं वो सारी इंडस्ट्री, वो लोग तो महलों में रह रहे हैं शहरों में। वही फर्क है जो इस नतीजे हमें इसी बात पे ही हम ये क्लाइमेट जस्टिस की बात इसीलिए कर रहे हैं क्योंकि जो लॉ है वो एक्चुअली जस्टिस ओरिएंटेड ही होने चाहिए, जो आगे आने चाहिए। तो अभी तो काफी आगे है जाना, बट बहुत इश्यूज स्टेट वाइज आई एम श्योर हर जगह है। ट्राइबल राइट्स को तो बहुत ही इग्नोर किया जा रहा है, एक्टिवली इग्नोर किया जा रहा है। ऐसा नहीं कि कुछ सिस्टम में प्रॉब्लम आ गई और भूल गए, एक्टिवली इग्नोर किया जा रहा है आज की डेट में। तो हमें साथ जुड़ के पॉलिटिकल चेंज के लिए तो प्रेस करना चाहिए।
Yeah. And Zaman, Zaman, Minaz, both of you, if you can see the chat box, there are a couple of questions. Or do you want me to read it to you? There is one by Niranjan and the other by...
There's one by Govind on the recent study.
Yeah.
I read that study. It's quite enterprising in the sense it's what it takes care is कि वो normal तरीके से if you do afforestation आज की डेट में you just plant one type of particular trees, it's like monoculture in a particular area, saying that यहाँ पे हम afforestation करेंगे, it's actually going to be more harmful for climate change than being you know। अभी तक तो हम लोग को भी पता नहीं था ऐसा है। I'm not a scientist, but जितना मैंने पढ़ा है उसमें ये पता चल रहा है कि it is more related to soil। जिस एरिया में अभी तक डेंस फॉरेस्ट थे और उसको डिफॉरेस्ट किया जा चुका है पहले, एंड देन नाउ यू आर ट्राइंग टू एफॉरेस्ट दैट वेरी लैंड विद अ डिफरेंट टाइप ऑफ स्पीशीज, देन द कार्बन सेक्वेस्ट्रेशन एंड द हेल्थ ऑफ अ ट्री टू सीक्वेस्टर विल बी लो अपेरेंटली। तो थोड़ा सा ये साइंटिफिक इश्यूज में कार्बन और कार्बन सिंकिंग इज वेरी क्लोजली कनेक्टेड टू सॉइल। So I think इस पे और articles में come up, but this is a very new surprising article for all of us. What turns out is that जो कभी भी वैसे भी this is a given thing, कोई afforestation हो रहा है कहीं भी, you have to make sure there is diversity of trees. एक species को आप नहीं कर सकते continuously. If we stick to that, उससे then the soil health will continue to remain good. So that's a very new interesting stuff.
And I think it's also important because in a lot of cases where they've sought permission to clear forests, it is on the condition is always there that you have to afforest twice the amount or 3 times the amount of that. And if the study says that afforestation itself has failed, then one questions this condition, that if you're saying that this is the condition, and if it's proven that afforestation is something that is not possible or very often fails, then what is the point of having this condition? And does it really take care then of the environmental concerns of cutting a thriving forest for something that will potentially not even work?
Then there seems to be a second question saying, aren't we pushing fast and unfruitful change under the garb of environmental activism? I think we can harp more on this. Govind can explain this more, but there's no time left for further change. We can't sit over on our chairs any longer, in any case. So if you respect science, I think you may want to change your question.
Yeah, I think we've covered more or less almost that we wanted to. And this webinar was basically intended for engagement with students. Although we do not see a lot of students here, maybe the organizers from GLC can tell them that they've not missed on anything because we are accessible. So they can certainly get back to us anytime they have any questions or they want to know of anything. And I think it was a brilliant session. Especially thank you everybody for participating. More special thanks to Zaman and Minaz for actually enlightening us with, all the aspects that we, as despite being lawyers, are not really aware of. So it was great learning. Thank you so much. And we have run 13.
Just a second, Afreen. There's one guy, Neil, want to ask a question.
Okay, Neil, please go ahead. If Zaman and Minaz, you are not running out on time.
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah.
No, please.
Yeah, so this, hi, I'm Neil. So this point was raised about the growth spent on the metro project validated in court, right? How that we spend this money, what we do. So with the EI notification change also allowing, like making the post-facto norm, I'll expect to see broadcast projects will already be started without a clearance. And then if people bring up the clearance issue, they'll simply say that we've already spent so many crores now. What we want to do.
Sorry, what is the question? Or was it just a comment?
You all expect to see this become more normal in courts where if this notification is allowed, that developers will simply say that based on the, we've already started our work, we've already spent crores.
Yeah.
Like, continue now. Like,
yeah,
how
definitely. In fact, even before this provision was formally introduced in the EI notification, I mean, there is a proposal to formally include it now. But even before that, we've seen in a number of cases where people have challenged projects on the ground that they lack the required environmental clearances, where the courts have said that, okay, look, they've spent this much money already, they've invested so much money, let them pay so and so amount to the Pollution Control Board and they can continue with what they've done. So with judicial sanction, something that is actually not allowed in law, we've seen in several cases, has been permitted. Recently, of course, the Supreme Court in, I think in Alembic Pharmaceuticals matter, said that the concept of post-facto clearance itself is something that is alien to environmental law. And just shortly after that, this new EI notification was published, which formally now has a provision for post-facto clearance. So we definitely think that is a provision that is going to be used left, right, and center in the coming years, for sure.
But spending money and like investing in your project without clearance and without the permissions is a mistake on the part of the developer, right? How is this something that gets pushed onto the environmentalists and like the costs are borne by the forests? Like, why hasn't this been able to be overturned and put on the burden of this be put on the developers in courts yet?
Because there's this, I think this understanding that that you can offset the environmental impact of a project by paying a certain sum of money to the Pollution Control Board, and then the Pollution Control Board will try to sort of do something to offset the impacts of that project on the environment, which is actually something that's not at all possible. So the government and the judiciary seems to be under this misconception that you can simply like weigh both against each other, and if you're able to put enough money towards that, then it'll offset what impacts that project have had on the environment, which is actually not something that can be done at all. If you're destroying an ecosystem, paying 4 crores or 10 crores to try to restore that is not going to do anything. You can't restore an ecosystem. It's not something that can be done. You can't restore a forest.
No, if I may just add on to that. So whenever any project that is being constructed, it comes up prior to environment cliff. So there are different tranches of payment that come the investor to the developer or the project proponent. The first tranche will be on investing so much of money for your studies. The entire idea of an EIA is that you prepare a study and you likely on the environment. So that study, when you prepare, that's when they have started investing like crores of money now, and we see that argument being used. Though the majority, obviously, it can't be any project cannot begin and start utilizing that resource, that financial resource, that much money, unless on ground they start having a change. They bring the machinery, they start digging, cutting, whatever. But so the first tranche of money that is for making studies is where now we have seen a pattern where there has been a massive increase in the amount of money that is these experts, so-called experts, who after receiving crores of money always tend to file an EIA report which is biased and in favor of the project proponent. And this argument of having spent so much money for the studies being now used in courts. But I must say, prior to that, in the NGT between 2011 to 2016, we have seen many judgments. We have seen some upright judges who have began judgments by saying that financial incapability or financial investment cannot be a ground which has to be always kept in mind when we're dealing with this argument. So jurisprudence has kind of shaped, but the people who are sitting in the benches and the judges and the executive chair, judicial are wholly insensitive to this side of the environmental side. So what you're saying is right, but the situation keeps changing in this country. I don't know why, because education levels are still not so high, sensitivity is still not so high. So we are much behind. We are pattern wise. For some years, some things happen for good, and then suddenly we are taken back 15 years in the timeline. So yeah, we got to always be on our toes.
Okay. So any more questions, anybody? Or then we'll wrap the session. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zaman and Minhas, for agreeing to do this. And thank you everyone
Thank you,
for participating.
Afri.
See you on the other side.
Thank you, Archana.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
सॉरी फॉर लेट मीटिंग ज्वाइन
Bye.
किया तो मेरा प्रॉब्लम था इसके लिए.
कोई बात नहीं गोविंद भाई, कोई बात नहीं, हम अपनी मीटिंग में मिलेंगे.
हाँ ठीक है, थैंक यू.